Earth 3000, Chapter 1. Storm Beneath Shadow. The air in the corridor hung damp and metallic, thick with the churn of machinery grinding far below. Mara Finn moved like a shadow through the fractured light of flickering bulbs, her pulse snapping against her ribcage in rhythm with her hurried breaths. She clutched the stolen supplies close against her chest, a bundle of tightly wrapped nutrient packs, a slim canister of purified water. Sweat slicked her palms against the parcel. The echo of booted footsteps, growing louder, crackled down the narrow passage. Security. They weren't supposed to be patrolling Sector D tonight, but then, nothing about Storm Haven Beta ever aligned with what was supposed to be. She slipped into an alcove as the footsteps neared, biting the inside of her cheek to stifle the ragged edge of her breathing. Her back pressed against cold, pitted steel, and she willed herself into invisibility. A skill she'd learned the hard way, years ago, when the fraction of humanity that clawed its way underground had decided whose lives were documented and whose weren't. Unregistered meant untracked, but it also meant unprotected. Mara lived in the in-between, where survival was its own act of defiance. The guards passed, a pair moving briskly in their gray polymer uniforms. Their voices, muffled beneath their visors, reached her ears as murky currents of sound. Her heartbeat refused to synchronize with their fading stride. It kept doubling back on itself, warning her that she never had as much time as she thought. Mara exhaled slowly through her nose and darted out the moment their boots vanished into the ambient hum of the Haven's machinery. Every step was measured, deliberate. The supplies weighed more than she anticipated. Hunger had underestimated her own fragility. But she didn't loosen her grip. Not until she reached safety. And safety, down here, was a mirage. Flickering, fleeting, always just beyond one more corner. The corridor opened into the bazaar, a sprawling patchwork of stalls and crates clustered beneath a canopy of makeshift tarps. The stale, recycled air soured further with the mingled stench of overripe produce, chemical fuel, and sweat-drenched desperation. Voices overlapped in heated barters, whispered deals, and the occasional bark of someone cheated out of what little they had. Mara hated the bazaar. She hated the crush of bodies, the way eyes lingered too long on her when they thought she wasn't looking, and above all, the vendors who watched with predatory calculation. Nothing here was safe. Nothing here was free. But her route depended on crossing the bazaar, so she kept her chin tucked low, her limbs coiled tight against her stolen burden. As she weaved through the labyrinth of market stalls, her eyes darted, cataloging every surface for exits, threats, traps. And then she saw it. It wasn't much at first, a corner of yellowed parchment peeking out from beneath an oilcloth. But it was enough to hook her gaze, to twist her attention away from the pounding beat of survival for just one treacherous second. She paused, hesitated, stupid, reckless. And yet her feet seemed locked in place as the vendor shifted, revealing more of what lay beneath. Maps, real paper ones, faded with age and smudged by countless hands, or storms. But the one that hung prominently from a rusted frame seemed different. Its edges shimmered faintly, as though caught between light and shadow, and she swore she could trace strange symbols etched along its borders, shifting where they shouldn't. "What are you staring at, girl?" The vendor's voice cut through her trance, sharp and suspicious, and Mara forced herself to glance away, to keep moving. Something about that map clawed at her mind like a splinter beneath skin. She needed to run, to bury herself in an alley before the guards doubled back. But she felt the map's weight in her peripheral like a promise. No, a pull. For the briefest flicker of a moment, it didn't seem like the bazaar's dim electric light reflecting off layers of grime, but something else entirely. Something alive. A breathing map. Don't lose your mind now, Mara. She shoved herself forward, breaking into a faster rhythm, lifting her hood higher to obscure her features as she threaded through the crowd. Her stolen supplies seemed louder now, crinkling with every sudden lurch of movement. She couldn't stop. Couldn't think about anything that didn't involve finding another empty corridor and disappearing into it. Unseen, forgotten. That was when the alarm blared. Its shrill, unforgiving note stabbed through her eardrums, reverberating against the low concrete ceiling until the entire marketplace paused as one. Heads turned. The crowd parted, a quicksilver ripple of self-preservation. And at its epicenter, Mara stood paralyzed. A bug pinned by the sudden floodlights bursting to life above her. "Unauthorized theft detected," the automated voice announced, clinical, detached, as though reading her death sentence from beneath a veil of static. "Sector D, suspect unregistered." The phrase hit her like an unspoken verdict. Her legs moved before her brain caught up, reflex overriding terror, and she bolted toward the nearest break between stalls. Vendors shouted. Someone grabbed at her arm, but she twisted free, the parcel nearly tumbling from her grip. No time to think. No route to plan. Just run. The guards were close now. She could hear the quickened pound of their boots, the unmistakable hiss of low-grade plasma pistols being uncovered from holsters. A bolt of energy seared past her ear, biting into a support beam, and the acrid stink of burning metal tore at her nostrils. She ducked into a side alley, her pulse choking her throat, and careened forward toward shadows darker than the rest. For a moment, she swore she heard something other than the cacophony. A whisper, breezy and distant, like wind brushing over an empty vastness, tugging at the back of her mind no matter how tightly she shut it out. The map didn't shimmer in her memory anymore. It shined like a storm's eye. And then the alley ended. A solid wall blocked her path forward. Her legs skidded to a halt. The guards were closing in. The alarm was still howling above, swallowing her thoughts in waves of panic. Nowhere to run. No way to fight. Holding her breath against the rising tide of fear, her grip tightened on the stolen food, but her gaze fell to the entrance of the alleyway. Her heart waited for what would find her there. Chapter 2. The Celestial Whisper. The pale, sterile glow of the monitors bathed the research chamber in an unrelenting silence. Ryder Quinn's fingers moved with precision over the console, each keystroke sharp against the hum of the scanning equipment that filled the room. The air, stagnant beneath the Earth's crust, was tinged with the damp iron scent that came from being too deep for too long. The walls around him, sheets of reinforced steel laced with geothermic conduits, seemed to hum as though alive, vibrating faintly with the distant pulse of humanity's survival systems. But his focus remained locked on the shifting pattern spiraling across his central monitor. The cyclone on the screen was not just powerful, its movements defied every rule he'd ever mapped. Tendrils of wind carved erratic loops across the simulated globe, its core surging unpredictably like a beast testing the boundaries of its cage. He leaned in closer, bracing his roughened hands on the desk's cold surface. His glasses, crooked from years of not caring, slid down the bridge of his nose, but he didn't bother to adjust them. His heart thudded once, heavy against his ribs, the way it always did when patterns collapsed into chaos. Not a storm, a performance. The cyclone moved with intention. "Another celestial," he muttered, his voice dry from hours of disuse. A knot thickened at the base of his throat. The thought tumbled unspoken through his mind, a possibility he hated to consider but couldn't ignore. The Celestials were evolving. For centuries, their behavior had been vast, destructive, but largely predictable. Not anymore. He tapped a sequence into the console, the screen panning to display overlapping data streams. Wind velocity, pressure shifts, water temperatures. None of it explained the unhinged trajectory of this particular spiral. The AI assistance module nearby chirped, offering probabilities, none of which reassured him. "No," Ryder murmured, waving the module's suggestions aside. This wasn't a storm responding to physics. It was something else entirely. A deliberate whisper, calculated and cruel, like it wanted him to see. A soft clink of ceramic against steel broke his concentration. Ryder looked over his shoulder, startled for a half second before realizing that he'd just knocked the edge of an empty coffee mug off his elbow. It fell, rolled, and clattered to a stop near the foot of the research chamber door. He exhaled through clenched teeth, suddenly aware of the tightness in his back. Pulling himself upright, he flexed his shoulders and rubbed his palms together, feeling the raw heat from hours of clenched fists. He needed time, more time than he was willing to admit. Every anomaly presented more questions than answers, and his small research team stationed here in Haven Alpha had dwindled to just himself. The others had transferred topside months ago, either to join reconnaissance efforts or to his occasional suspicion, the whispers of underground storm cults. An alert chimed to life, a faint ping rolling across the chamber like a single drop of water in an empty well. Ryder grimaced, leaning forward again. The screen dimmed, replaced with a glowing text transmission filling the upper left corner. He froze as he read. Movement in Quadrant 7. Whispering cyclone spotted by cult operatives en route. Suspected impact 48 hours. Confirmed civilian displacement. Ryder's stomach tightened. Quadrant 7. That was dangerously close. During his early research days, such reports had always felt far removed, theoretical even, dismissed by the hubris that the Celestials only moved according to the old mathematical models. Not anymore. Quadrant 7 was no buffer zone. It was still occupied, barely, but there were families there. Of course, families wouldn't have been his focus years ago. They wouldn't even have been factors in the equation. But that was before the cultivators had gone silent, before the resource teams arriving from neighboring havens started dragging their feet about supply sharing. Now every loss, every evacuation, hurt more. He could feel the fractures like hairline cracks in an ice sheet growing underfoot. The whispering cyclone. Ryder's hand tremored as he tightened his grip on the desk edge. The name was no allegory. Survivors from outer perimeter attacks described hearing it. Soft, pleading words woven into the storm's howl, their meaning alien and unclear. It drove men to their knees. It drove others to fringe devotion. A rapid sequence of 3 more chimes interrupted his thoughts. This time it wasn't data or surface movement reports. A new transmission, a distress signal, appeared on the monitor, scrawling out like crimson veins against the black screen. Beta Haven. Perimeter breach detected. Request immediate response. What the hell? Ryder's voice cracked out loud as he stiffened. His pulse spiked hard enough that he felt the ache under his ribs. He knew Beta Haven. Small, insular, and notoriously separate from the Stormhaven network at large. Little more than a name on old geological maps. But a breach? That was rare enough to freeze his lungs mid-breath. And immediate response? No, that was impossible. Beta lay an underground corridor ride too far and lacked the integrated defenses of Alpha. The signal cut out, sputtering electronically before disappearing completely. Now silence returned to the chamber. A single unbearable pause that Ryder couldn't unravel. Beta Haven's trajectory couldn't have been a coincidence. The whispering cyclone was moving toward Quadrant 7, and its operatives, fanatics, were already circling the wreckage. If this distress signal meant a living person had gotten out, it painted a larger problem. The cult wasn't just worshipping anymore. Mara knew something Ryder didn't. Before his hands could complete their search protocol, he glanced back, reminding him of the utter emergency. He disconnected that loop entirely,